Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now. Alexander Zverev had a complete meltdown during his Australian Open semi-final against Carlos Alcaraz, unleashing a profanity-laced tirade at the chair umpire that shocked viewers around the world. Alexander Zverev just showed the world exactly why he can't win Grand Slams. And it wasn't because of his forehand or his serve or his movement. It was because when the pressure peaked, when things didn't go his way, when he needed to dig deep and find championship composure, he instead completely lost his mind and screamed profanities at a chair umpire who was just doing their job, not once, multiple times, at full volume, on international television, in front of thousands of fans, during a Grand Slam semifinal. The moment when champions are supposed to show their best selves, Zverev showed us his worst. And the crazy part? The thing that triggered this meltdown wasn't even that controversial. It was a standard situation that happens in tennis all the time. But for Zverev, in that moment, with the match slipping away and his Grand Slam dreams dying again, it was the spark that lit the fuse on a bomb that's been building for years. Because this outburst wasn't really about the umpire or the specific call. This was about accumulated frustration, about another Grand Slam semifinal going wrong, about watching Alcaraz do things he can't do, about feeling control slip away, about the crushing weight of knowing you're not quite good enough when it matters most. The profanity was just the symptom. The disease is much deeper. Let's talk about what actually happened because the specific incident matters, even if it's not the whole story. Alcaraz was cramping. Badly. We've covered that in detail elsewhere. But the relevant part for this story is what happened during one of the breaks in play when Alcaraz was dealing with his cramping. The umpire made a decision about timing, about how much time Alcaraz was allowed to take, about when play should resume. Standard chair umpire stuff that happens in every match. Zverev disagreed, strongly. He felt Alcaraz was getting preferential treatment, that the rules weren't being applied fairly, that he was being disadvantaged by decisions that favored his opponent, and instead of making his case calmly or through official channels, he exploded. "Fing Bolst! This is Fing Bolst!" The umpire, to their credit, stayed calm, didn't engage with the emotion, tried to explain the ruling, but Zverev wasn't interested in explanations. He was interested in venting, in expressing his rage and frustration at a situation he felt was unjust. And here's the thing, maybe he had a point. Maybe the timing was questionable. Maybe there's an argument to be made about fairness. But the way he made that argument destroyed any validity it might have had. Because once you're a reasonable person making a legitimate complaint and become the angry child throwing a tantrum. Tennis has rules about conduct, about how you're allowed to speak to officials, about what language is acceptable on court. Zverev was too much. The realization that he was losing another big match was too much. So he snapped, and the whole world. Clips of the outburst went viral within minutes. Tennis fans, sports fans, casual observers, everyone had an opinion about what they'd just witnessed. Some people defended Zverev, said he was fighting for fairness, that he was standing up for himself, that showing emotion is part of sports, and we shouldn't sanitize everything, that the umpire made questionable calls, and Zverev had every right to be upset. Others were appalled, said the language was unacceptable, that screaming at officials sets a terrible example, that there's a difference between passion and disrespect, that Zverev crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed regardless of the circumstances. Both perspectives have merit, but what's undeniable is that the outburst didn't help Zverev. It didn't change the umpire's decision. It didn't improve his position in the match. If anything, it probably hurt him by breaking his own focus and giving Alcaraz even more psychological ammunition. Because imagine being Alcaraz in that moment. You're cramping, completely loses his composure, and starts screaming at the umpire. That tells you everything you need to know. It tells you he's cracking, that the pressure is getting to him, that if you can just hang on a little longer, he might implode completely. That's valuable information. And Alcaraz, savvy competitor that he is, absolutely filed that away and used it. Every time Zverev showed frustration after that, Alcaraz knew he had him, knew the mental battle was won, even if the physical battle was still being contested. So the outburst, from a purely strategic standpoint, was self-sabotage. Zverev gave away his mental state to his opponent and to everyone watching. He showed weakness at exactly the moment when he needed to project strength. Let's dig into the psychology of what was really happening here, because the surface-level explanation, he was mad about a call, doesn't capture the full picture. Zverev was in an impossible situation psychologically. He was playing well, better than he has in many Grand Slam semifinals. He was right there with Alcaraz. The match was even. And then Alcaraz started cramping, which should have been a huge advantage. But instead of feeling confident and in control, Zverev felt pressure, intense pressure. Because now, he had to win. There was no excuse left. His opponent was physically compromised. If he couldn't close this out, what would that say about him as a competitor? That pressure built with every passing game. Every time Alcaraz won a point while cramping, the pressure increased. Every time Zverev made an error when he should have been capitalizing, the pressure mounted. It was suffocating him psychologically. And then the incident with the umpire happened. Whatever the specific details were, it became a release valve for all that accumulated pressure and frustration. It wasn't really about the call. It was about everything, about his whole career of coming up short in big moments, about watching other players succeed where he's failed, about the growing fear that maybe he's just not built for this level of pressure. The profanity was him screaming all of that into the void. It was a primal expression of frustration that had nothing to do with the chair umpire and everything to do with Zverev's relationship with himself and his career. That's why the outburst was so intense, why he couldn't control it even though he knew better, why it kept going even after the first explosion. The dam had broken and everything came flooding out. From a sports psychology perspective, this is actually a pretty common phenomenon. Athletes under extreme pressure often have these kinds of blow-ups. The pressure builds to unsustainable levels, and then something relatively minor triggers a massive release. It's not about the trigger, it's about the pressure. The problem for Zverev is that champions find ways to manage that pressure without exploding. They channel it into their performance. They use it as fuel rather than letting it consume them. That's what separates Federer and Nadal and Djokovic from everyone else. Not just talent, but the ability to function under pressure that would break most people. Zverev hasn't figured that out yet, and moments like this suggest he might never figure it out. Because this isn't the first time he's had a mental breakdown in a big match. It's a pattern. And patterns that persist this deep into a career tend to be pretty ingrained. Let's talk about the language specifically, because that's what made this blow-up so shocking to many viewers. Tennis has traditionally been a genteel sport. There are rules about conduct and language. Players get penalized for racket abuse, for audible obscenities, for unsportsmanlike conduct. The sport tries to maintain a certain level of decorum, even in the heat of competition. But tennis has also always had its rebels and its meltdowns. McEnroe made a career partly on his outbursts. Serena has had infamous moments of losing her cool. Kyrgios turns blow-ups into an art form. So it's not like profanity and confrontations with officials are unprecedented. What made Zverev's outburst notable was the context and the intent who was just doing their job. That combination is what made it shocking. And the specific words matter. Effing bullst isn't creative or clever. It's just raw anger expressed in the bluntest possible terms. There's no wit to it, no humor, no performance. It's just rage. And that rawness is what made it so uncomfortable to watch. Because we all have moments where we want to scream obscenities at authority figures we think are treating us unfairly. But most of us don't do it. We control ourselves because we know it's not acceptable behavior and it won't help our situation. Watching Zverev not control himself is uncomfortable because it's like watching someone do the thing we all want to do, but know we shouldn't. There's also an element of schadenfreude for some viewers. People who've never particularly liked Zverev, who've found him arrogant or off-putting, got to watch him completely lose his composure on the biggest stage. That's entertainment for a certain type of fan. Watching someone you don't like have a public meltdown scratches a particular itch. But for Zverev's actual fans, this had to be painful to watch, because it confirmed their worst fears about his mental weakness. It gave ammunition to all his critics. It provided evidence for everyone who says he doesn't have what it takes to win the biggest matches. The question of penalties is interesting. Should Zverev have been defaulted for this outburst? Should he have received a game penalty or multiple point penalties? The rules say that obscenities and abuse of officials can result in penalties up to and including default. But enforcement is inconsistent. Some chair umpires are stricter than others. Some tournaments care more about enforcing conduct rules than others. And there's always judgment involved in deciding whether something crosses the line into penalty territory. In this case, Zverev apparently received warnings or point penalties, but wasn't defaulted. Whether that was the right call depends on your perspective. If you think the language and tone crossed a line that should never be crossed, then yes, he should have been defaulted. If you think some leeway should be given for emotion in high-pressure situations, then warnings and point penalties might be appropriate. Zverev, for this, you need to default everyone who does similar things. And if you don't default him, you're setting a precedent that this level of outburst is tolerable. Neither option is great. Probably the fairest system would be clearer, more objective rules about what constitutes default-worthy behavior. But tennis seems to prefer giving umpires discretion, which inevitably leads to inconsistency. The aftermath of the outburst is almost as interesting as the outburst itself, because Zverev had to keep playing after that explosion. He had to try to refocus and compete after showing the entire world his worst self, and he couldn't do it. His tennis fell apart after the blow-up. Whether that's because the outburst broke his concentration, or because the same mental state that caused the outburst also affected his tennis, or both, the result was the same. He imploded. That's the ultimate proof that the outburst didn't help. If he'd screamed at the umpire and then channeled that anger into playing better tennis and winning the match, you could argue the blow-up served a purpose. But he didn't. He got worse, which means all the outburst accomplished was making him look bad and giving his opponent confidence. Looking at the bigger picture, this moment is going to follow Zverev for the rest of his career. Every time he plays a big match from now on, commentators will reference this meltdown. Every time he shows frustration, people will wonder if another explosion is coming. It becomes part of his narrative in a way that's hard to escape. And for a player who already has a negative narrative around not being able to win Grand Slams, adding has mental breakdowns in big matches to the story is devastating. It reinforces every doubt anyone has ever had about his ability to handle pressure. The comparisons to other famous tennis meltdowns are inevitable. McEnroe's "You Cannot Be Serious" is legendary, but also kind of charming in retrospect. It's become part of his brand. Serena's US Open blow-up at the Umpire was controversial, but many people defended her as fighting against injustice. Kyrgios's various outbursts are expected and almost boring at this point. Zverev's meltdown doesn't fit any of those molds. It's not charming or defensible or expected. It's just sad. It's watching a talented player who should be better than this completely fail to manage his emotions at the worst possible time. And that's the lasting image from this incident, not the specific words or the specific call or the specific moment, but the larger trend. He breaks. That's a devastating thing to learn about yourself, and an even more devastating thing for the world to learn about you. because once that's your reputation, it's incredibly hard to change it. Every future big match, opponents will know that if they can just apply enough pressure, Zverev might crack. That's a huge disadvantage to carry into important matches. The really tragic part is that Zverev is talented enough to win Grand Slams. His tennis is good enough. His physical abilities are more than sufficient. If this was just about hitting tennis balls, he'd have multiple majors by now. But it's not just about hitting tennis. Impulses take over, and in that area, Zverev is failing, repeatedly. And this outburst is just the latest, most public example of that failure. The question everyone in tennis is asking now is whether Zverev can come back from this, whether he can use this as a learning experience and grow from it, whether hitting rock bottom publicly will somehow motivate him to develop better mental skills and composure. The optimistic answer is that yes, people can change and grow, that this could be the wake-up call Zverev needs to take his mental game seriously and work with sports psychologists and coaches to develop better coping mechanisms. That future Zverev will look back on this moment as the turning point that led to Grand Slam success. The pessimistic answer is that this is who Zverev is, that at 27 years old, his patterns are too ingrained to change, that he'll continue to be talented enough to reach semifinals and finals, but not mentally strong enough to win them. That this meltdown is just one in a series that will define his career as unfulfilled potential. Which answer is correct will only become clear over time. But right now, in the immediate aftermath of this outburst, the pessimistic answer feels more likely. Because champions don't do this. Champions don't lose their minds and scream profanities at umpires during Grand Slam semifinals. They might get frustrated. They might disagree with calls. They might show emotion. But they control it. They channel it. They use it as fuel rather than letting it consume them. Zverev showed us that he can't do that yet. And until he can, he's going to keep falling short in the matches that matter most. The talent will keep getting him to semifinals and finals. The mental weakness will keep preventing him from winning them. And this outburst, this moment of completely losing control and screaming effing bullst at an umpire while the whole world watched, will be remembered as the perfect encapsulation of why Alexander Zverev, for all his talent, can't win when it matters most. There's also the institutional question of what tennis should do about incidents like this. Does the sport have a problem with player conduct? Are the rules strict enough? Are they enforced consistently enough? Should there be harsher penalties for abusing officials? These are difficult questions because tennis walks a fine line between maintaining decorum and allowing emotional expression. The sport benefits from passion and intensity. Completely emotionless tennis would be boring, but there has to be a line somewhere between passion and abuse. Where that line is and how to enforce it consistently is something tennis has struggled with for decades. Different officials draw the line in different places. Different tournaments have different cultures around enforcement. And players know this, which means they sometimes test boundaries to see what they can get away with. Zverev's outburst is a perfect test case for these questions. Was it bad enough to warrant harsher penalties? Should he face fines or suspensions beyond what happened during the match? Should tennis make an example of him to send a message about acceptable behavior? Or was this just an unfortunate moment of frustration that deserves some understanding? Should tennis recognize that athletes are human, and sometimes humans lose their cool under extreme pressure? Should there be some grace given for the emotional intensity of Grand Slam semifinals? Reasonable people can disagree about these questions, but what's certain is that tennis needs to figure out consistent answers. Because right now, the inconsistency in how these situations are handled creates more problems than it solves. The impact on Zverev's sponsorships and public image is another angle worth considering. Sponsors pay athletes to represent their brands. They want those athletes to be positive ambassadors. Watching someone scream profanities on international television during a Grand Slam is not great brand representation. Will sponsors stick with Zverev after this? Will some drop him? Will it affect his ability to sign new deals? These are real business considerations that extend beyond just the tennis. For a player like Zverev, who's already had some public relations challenges over the years, this doesn't help. It adds to a narrative of someone who doesn't always make the best decisions under pressure. And in the modern era, where athletes are brands and public perception matters enormously, that's a problem. The other players on tour are also watching and learning from this incident. Young players see what Zverev did and the consequences, or lack thereof. They're forming opinions about what's acceptable and what crosses the line. They're thinking about how they want to conduct themselves in similar situations. Some will look at this and think, I never want to be that guy. I never want to lose control like that. Others might think, everyone gets frustrated sometimes. It's not that big a deal. Both reactions are happening right now in locker rooms and training academies around the world, and that ripple effect matters for the culture of tennis going forward. Because how the sport responds to this incident will influence how players behave in future incidents. If there are serious consequences, players will be more careful. If there aren't, some players will feel emboldened to push boundaries. Was Zverev's outburst justified frustration or inexcusable behavior? Should he have been defaulted for the language and abuse of the official? And, more importantly, can he ever overcome these mental demons and win a Grand Slam? Drop your take in the comments, and let's debate whether this kind of blow-up is acceptable in sports. Subscribe for more analysis of the psychological side of tennis that often matters more than the actual tennis. Hit that like button if you think this meltdown perfectly explains why Zverev keeps falling short in the biggest moments. Alexander Zverev had a complete meltdown during his Australian Open semifinal against Carlos Alcaraz, unleashing a profanity-laced tirade at the chair umpire that shocked viewers around the world.